1, 2, 3, 4.
The lights are on, the stage is set, the curtain rises, as tonight's performer prepares himself for another one of his acts. A one that includes a loss of life, but expressed with beauty and art. So, let tonight's show begin, because
My audience awaits.
the name Jhin makes people shiver with just the mere mention of it. His infamous artworks makes one's skin prickle and teeth clench. Seeing the aftermath of one of his performances changes you, it breaks you. The tale of a golden demon, a name associated with a certain cruel spirit, could be heard across the whole region of Ionia, a place that believes in harmony and balance with the world, a place that values peace above all, because they believe nature will take care of things. In time, nature alone will put everything into order. All the plays and epic poems depicting this golden demon were just a part of a folklore. They were just legends, like a boogeyman, a story used to tame and awe the children. However, after some investigation of several scenes of murder, where a whole farmsteads were slaughtered, with only thing left behind being a display of twistedly arranged corpses, it was soon discovered that this myth is not much of a myth after all. It was soon discovered that this monster isn't just some folklore demon or a bad spirit, but it's actually just a mortal being. A man. This revelation shocked the citizens of Ionia, because it directly contradicted their usual ways. It completely shattered their beliefs in peace and balance. From this point on, a terror would fill the minds of everyone, with just a mere mention of this man's stage name, Jhin. So, who actually is Jhin? And what is his motivation for such a heinous crimes? Jhin is a murderer, an assassin. These would be choices of words of someone else describing him. But he sees himself differently. He sees himself as an artist, a poet, a painter, a composer. In his twisted mind, death is something beautiful. It is something that fulfills him, something that satisfies him. And he is very precise and meticulous with his compositions. He plans his murders weeks, even months, if not years ahead, figuring out every detail beforehand, so that when the day of the performance comes, every element, every part is perfect. In his twisted mind, death is an art. This longing for an artistic satisfaction, combined with the need for a perfectionism, results in an obsession. He lives for his work, and he would die for it. One side effect of this obsession is his fixation on number 4, a number that holds a lot of meaning in music. A vast majority of all music is in 4/4 time signature. That means there are 4 quarter notes in each bar of the song, which gives any piece of music a rhythm that really resonates with a human ear. 4/4 time feels most natural to us. Any other time signature is something out of the norm. It's normally referred to as a common time, because of how common it is. So let's look at some examples on how Jhin is associated with this number. Let's go! In Mandarin and Cantonese, the number 4 is pronounced similarly to the word death. When building an in-game item called Collector that executes low health champions, Jhin's Collector deals 4,444 damage. Looking at the letters making up the name Jhin on the keyboard, they form a shape of a number 4. He costs 4,444 blue essence in the shop. His gun called Whisper holds 4 bullets. In-game, his Q ability called Dancing Grenade bounces off enemies 4 times. His W ability marks enemies for 4 seconds. His E ability reveals them for 4 seconds. He fires 4 shots with his ultimate. Joke animation, his gun fires 4 times. The name Jhin has 4 letters. Released on a leap year that only happens every 4 years. And finally, his music theme is made up of 4 acts, each act representing his internal feelings during his performance, starting with a development of his composition, going through the fatal blow that leads up to the ecstasy after the deed is done. So, let's take a look inside the mind of an artist. The first act describes the final few moments before Jhin actually fires the killing blow. It presents his anticipation, but not in a longing way. He's not craving it, because he's way too collected for that. He's a professional. He's an artist. He does not rush things. Everything is very precise and calculated. The score opens with the synthesizers and violins, but everything has a lot of reverb on it, which makes the sound very distant. The second bar introduces a string section, which serves as an accompaniment. A whole note held for a whole bar turns into eighth notes with a staccato marking. This gives the music a sense of movement. We get some melodic fragments in the violins, but still very reverbed. However, in the very next moment, the percussion enters. And oh boy does the percussion enter. Not only does it break through the distant reverb sound, but alongside the drums, there are also sounds of a firearm being loaded to the rhythm. The gun itself is being turned into a musical instrument, which is just genius. After 4 bars of this, a first real melodic statement appears in the violins. At the same time, the choir is heard for the first time as well. Now let's talk about the choir for a moment. This section is made up of 4 parts, 4 voices: soprano, alto, tenor, and a bass. The soprano voice holds the main melody of this first act. It is this simple 4-note motif. Now if we skip through the other voices and look at the bass line, we can see that the bass voice is doing almost exactly the same thing as the soprano part, but sometimes in an opposite way. For example here, the soprano goes up 1 note, while the bass goes down 1 note. Then they both jump up 2 notes and move down 1 note. This is what we call a counterpoint. Counterpoint is a relationship of 2 or more melodic lines that are connected, yet independent on one another. Let's listen to just the 2 voices being played together. Beautiful, isn't it? The function of the other 2 voices, alto and a tenor, is to fill in the missing space between the 2 alto voices. In the case of the alto voice, it is even a little more complex because it also provides a counter melody to the main soprano melody. In the tenor voice, it's also worth noting that this arrangement of a quarter note rest, then a quarter note, followed by a half note, is going to come back in the second act, so keep that in mind. The choir gives the music this ethereal beauty. Keep in mind that the piece describes the act of murder from Jhin's point of view, so the choir nicely reflects his satisfaction and delight from the act. The string section, as I said, serves as an accompaniment. It establishes the tonality of a C minor, with this repeated open chord of a C minor. The C and the double bass is also a pedal point, one and the same note being repeated over a changing harmony. The only exception being bars 14 to 17, where the bass moves as it copies the bass voice from the choir. At bar 18, the choir slowly fades away. The strings hold a very long notes of a C minor chord, and amongst all this, a fast violin arpeggio emerges. It climbs higher and higher in pitch, going through the notes of a C minor, with some occasional notes outside of that chord that enriches the triad, like this D or this B flat for example. These arpeggios signals the last seconds before the shot. Like a trembling finger on the trigger, it reaches this high C, which is the highest note heard so far, like a small climax. After that, it gradually steps back down, coming back to this brief motif of a quarter note E flat down to a D, which leads us to the second act. The second act opens with a bang. Literally. Jhin finally fires his previously loaded weapon. The second act is pretty short, lasting only 8 bars. It is like an extension to the first act, or more like a resolution to it. The build-up of loading the gun finally resolves with a pull of a trigger. We can actually divide the whole piece into 2 sections, Acts 1 and 2, and Acts 3 and 4. Acts 1 and 3 being the build-ups, while numbers 2 and 4 are resolutions to those build-ups. In the second act, every element of this composition accumulates, while the gunshots are the main attraction here, of course. Let's see how other instruments respond to them. Starting with the choir, we can see that the soprano melody stays almost the same, with the only changes being in the pitch of the melody. The bass stays on a C pedal point, only changing at the very last bar, where it moves down to a G, which is a dominant. That means it wants to resolve back to the original note of a C. The tenor voice continues with this arrangement of notes, while being joined by the alto voice and also a piano. It always starts on on a higher note and goes down by a step. This is also a callback to the E flat down to a D motif that ended the first act. It nicely ties the two acts together. Notice that the intervals between the tenor and the alto voice is always that of fourth, meaning they are 4 notes away from each other. While this is obviously a reference to 4 being Jhin's favorite number, even though I'm not entirely sure if the composer intended that, the choice of this particular interval could also have some other reasoning. You see, the interval of a fourth is pretty dissonant, and there is also one kind of this interval that is especially dissonant, and it's this one. The notes of A flat and a D form an interval known as a tritone. In medieval times, this interval was actually banned from usage in music because of how harsh the sound of it is. It got nicknamed the Devil's Interval. The mention of devil is interesting, because there are rumors in musical world about one exceptional violinist being associated with a devil. The violinist in question was called Niccolò Paganini. The story goes that Paganini sold his soul to the devil for exchange of unrivaled skills on his instrument of choice and his unseen virtuosity. Could it be that Jhin has done exactly the same? That he sold his soul to some equivalent of a devil for his genius? Okay. I'm going way too far with this. The other, more plausible interpretation I have is that the dissonance of the interval is Jhin's subconscious, trying to inform him that what he is doing is actually pretty messed up. Maybe he is not a complete psychopath. Maybe he realizes that his actions are just wrong. He just can't resist. Maybe Jhin is just an equivalent of a 4-year-old, not being able to resist the temptation of a Pop-Tart. Alright, enough of a theory crafting. Let's look at what the string section is up to in this act. The 2 sets of violins turned into this ostinato configuration. Ostinato is a term used for repeated melodical, or in this case rhythmical motif. The viola and cello, while still mostly providing a harmony, develop some melodic interest with these embellishing tones. These tones, like this B flat for example, they do not belong to the chord being played, they just decorate them. Lastly, the second half of the second act, the violin arpeggios return. This time they end on this D note that desperately wants to resolve down to a C, but it never does. Instead it lingers in space, lasting under the whole bar. We do not get the sense of resolution at the end here, because this is not the end. The death itself is not the most important part for Jhin. It is the ecstasy that comes after it. The third act plays small, although very important role in this composition. It deals with the aftermath of the second act, both thematically and musically. Jhin is contemplating. He steps back and takes a look at his finished artwork, like a painter observing a finished canvas after the final brushstrokes. And the music reflects that. After all that excitement of the second act, the music needs to release all the energy, slow down the tempo. The first change, even though it's not very noticeable, is in time signature. We go from 4/4 to 5/4. When I said that the 4/4 time signature feels very familiar and natural to us, 5/4 is the exact opposite. Every time signature has a strong and weak beats. In 4/4, the beats 1 and 3 are strong, and beats 2 and 4 are weak. 3/4 time, for example, has a strong beat 1 and weak beats 2 and 3. Both of these are regular time signatures. In 4/4, it is always a strong beat followed by a weak one. In 3/4, it's a strong beat followed by 2 weak ones. Whereas in 5/4, it's different. It has 2 strong beats, one always being beat 1, and the other either beat 3 or beat 4. Let's say we put emphasis on the third beat, making it the strong one. In this case, the rhythm goes strong, weak, and weak. It is irregular. We have strong beat followed by a weak beat, then strong beat followed by 2 weak beats. It's uneven. The reason I see for the change is that the 2 final acts are more artistic. The first 2 acts, while still containing some real instrumental elements, like the choir and the violins, were quite mechanic, for lack of a better word. A lot of synthesizers were present, and most importantly, the sounds of the gun were the highlights of these 2 acts. The latter half of the composition gets rid of all of this, and only utilizes acoustic instruments. How this ties to the 5/4 time signature is that there is much more beauty in asymmetry, as Jhin himself says.
Symmetry is so boring.
The roundness and perfect evenness of the 4/4 is very industrial, whereas the 5/4 is much more expressive. The choir is the only thing we hear in this third act. It begins with a variation of this down a step motif that really ties this whole piece together. It also finally goes down to a note of a C, fully releasing all the tension built. The choir is very quiet at the start, like it reflects on what just happened. After 4 bars of this, the alto voice melody returns. In the first act, it was just an accompaniment to the main soprano melody, but this time it is the main melodic motif. At the same time, the music once again picks up momentum with a crescendo. We repeat this for another 4 bars, rising the dynamics to a forte. But quite surprisingly, the phrase doesn't end here. It exceeds for another 2 bars, and these 2 bars bring another big revelation. We get our first tonal change in the piece. We go to a dominant chord of a D7, which resolves to a G minor in the next bar, making it our new tonal center, while also marking the beginning of our final act. The fourth act is the longest and most expressive and most beautiful part of this composition. The narrative meaning for that is simple. This is what Jhin lives for. It's what he seeks out. This euphoria after his murderous act is what keeps him going. The main part of this section is of course the violin solo. Firstly, the choice of the instrument is very clever. When you think of virtuosity, violin is usually the first musical instrument that comes to mind. The solo consists of 2 simple motifs. Both of them repeat several times, and they change ever so slightly every time they do. As I said, we are now in the territory of a G minor, and we stay there basically till the very end. Throughout the solo, we venture through different chords of this tonality, but we always return back home to a G minor. Let's look closely to the last 4 bars, the climax of the solo, because it packs a lot of musical surprises and other interesting stuff. In bar 54, the choir that was providing sort of a background for the violin suddenly stops. The only sound we hear is this high G note in the violin, a note that we have been trying to reach for some time now in the melody. After the initial rest, the choir returns, now accompanied by a cello and a double bass. But quite unexpectedly, the harmony that the choir with the strings provide is not that of a G minor. It is instead a chord of a E flat major. The surprising harmonic shift combined with the brightness of a major chord really lifts up the mood. In the very next bar, the harmonic progression gets even more interesting. We begin with F major, but just a beat later it turns into F minor, with a half step from A down to A flat. This A flat is actually the first note we hear in this solo that does not belong in the G minor tonality. It actually hints at a C minor, the original tonality we began this piece with, and a C minor is also the very next chord we get in the subsequent bar. But nonetheless, we still go back to a G minor, as the melody peaks at this note of a B flat, before stepping down to a D that concludes the violin solo. And do you know what comes next? The arpeggios! This time in G minor, the arpeggios really signal that the piece is coming to an end. They are amping up the tension before the final climax of the music. We come to this already familiar motif of a E flat down to a D that could just end the whole piece here and there. But the composer has one more trick up his sleeve. We get misdirected, thinking the piece is over, but instead we go for a second round of arpeggios. This time they consist of 30-second notes, making them even faster than before. And now the chord progression actually suggests a tonality of a C minor, which would be pretty fitting. We would end the piece where we started it, but still the last note we hear is a G, which leaves the music unresolved. Which is a strange way to end it, but it makes perfect sense. Jhin can never be fully satisfied. He must keep going. Again and again. He is forever stuck in this never-ending cycle of beauty and violence. Jhin, the Virtuoso, a perfectly designed champion with a perfectly composed music. In this piece of art, we have ventured to a mind of a psychopath. We have deeply observed his thought process throughout the music. I have a huge admiration for Edward Bernason for composing this masterpiece, because it was a delight deconstructing it and presenting it to you. If you like this video essay, check out my last video, where I similarly analyzed the music theme of Kindred. Thanks for watching.